Brandon Fugal purchased Skinwalker Ranch to conduct transparent scientific investigation into one of the most paranormally active locations on Earth. For years, he's documented unexplained phenomena with cutting-edge technology and assembled a team of credentialed scientists to find answers. But something changed over the past 6 months. Activity at the ranch escalated beyond anything previously recorded, triggering responses from federal agencies that Brandon never anticipated. Objects violating restricted airspace, radiation signatures matching classified technology, and electromagnetic disturbances affecting military operations forced the government's hand. What started as private research became a national security issue overnight. Brandon Fugal is now breaking his silence about the government intervention that's changing everything about Skinwalker Ranch. Make sure you're subscribed because what he's about to reveal involves the highest levels of defense and intelligence communities, and the implications are staggering. The government's interest in Skinwalker Ranch didn't happen overnight. It was triggered by a series of escalating incidents that violated federal regulations and posed genuine national security concerns. It started in March when commercial airline pilots flying over Utah reported unidentified objects performing impossible maneuvers above the ranch property. Delta Flight 2437 from Salt Lake City to Denver reported a metallic craft hovering at approximately 30,000 feet before accelerating vertically at speeds that defied known aerospace capabilities. The pilot filed a mandatory FAA report, which immediately flagged the location coordinates: Skinwalker Ranch. 2 weeks later, NORAD tracking systems detected unexplained radar signatures originating from the same area. Objects appeared on military radar without transponders, moving in patterns inconsistent with aircraft, drones, or atmospheric phenomena. These weren't brief blips. Some lasted over 40 minutes, clearly visible to multiple tracking stations across the western United States. What really got the Pentagon's attention were the electromagnetic interference incidents. In April, Hill Air Force Base, located approximately 120 miles from Skinwalker Ranch, experienced communication disruptions during routine training exercises. Encrypted military communications were jammed by unknown electromagnetic pulses traced back to the Uinta Basin region. This happened 3 separate times over 2 weeks, always correlating with documented activity at Skinwalker Ranch. Brandon's team had recorded massive energy spikes on those exact dates. Then came the radiation readings that matched classified signatures. Dr. Travis Taylor's spectrometer detected radiation patterns that shouldn't exist outside government laboratories working on advanced propulsion systems. When those readings were cross-referenced with Department of Energy databases, alarms went off across multiple federal agencies. Someone or something at Skinwalker Ranch was generating emissions consistent with experimental defense technology that remained highly classified. By May, the FAA had issued official notices regarding the airspace above Skinwalker Ranch, citing unusual activity requiring investigation. Federal aviation investigators arrived, demanding access to Brandon's video footage and sensor data. The friendly curiosity that characterized earlier government interests transformed into something far more serious and legally threatening. Brandon Fugal's first official government contact came on a Tuesday morning in late May when 3 black SUVs arrived at Skinwalker Ranch without warning or appointment. Men in dark suits carrying Department of Defense credentials demanded immediate access to all video footage, sensor logs, and research data collected over the previous 6 months. They weren't asking. They were informing Brandon of federal requirements under national security statutes he'd never heard of. The lead agent presented documentation citing potential violations of restricted airspace protocols, unlicensed operation of equipment that could interfere with military communications, and possession of data related to classified defense projects. Brandon, a successful real estate developer accustomed to tough negotiations, immediately contacted his legal team. What followed was a tense standoff. The agents insisted they had authority to confiscate equipment and data immediately. Brandon's lawyers argued that private property rights protected him from warrantless searches. The compromise reached that day involved Brandon providing copies of specific footage while retaining originals, but the tone was set. This wasn't friendly cooperation between government and civilian researchers. It was adversarial from the start. Within days, Brandon received official letters from Pentagon legal counsel outlining serious concerns about activities at Skinwalker Ranch. The language was deliberately vague but unmistakably threatening. Phrases like potential compromise of national security, unauthorized monitoring of restricted frequencies, and collection of classified technical data appeared throughout the correspondence. Brandon's attorneys recognized this as legal groundwork for potential prosecution or forced compliance with government demands. The situation escalated when federal agents returned in June with equipment seizure orders, specific cameras, Radiation detectors and electromagnetic sensors were confiscated as evidence in ongoing national security investigation. Brandon watched helplessly as thousands of dollars in research equipment was loaded into government vehicles. The agents provided receipts, but no timeline for return of the equipment and no clear explanation of what laws had allegedly been violated. Most disturbing were the private conversations federal agents had with individual team members. Travis Taylor was approached separately and questioned about his research findings. Eric Bard received calls from Defense Intelligence Agency representatives asking about specific experiments conducted at the ranch. The government was clearly trying to gather information while simultaneously intimidating the team. The airspace violations became the legal hammer the government used to force Brandon Fugal into compliance. In early June, Brandon was summoned to a classified briefing at Hill Air Force Base, where he faced a room full of military intelligence officers, FAA officials, and Pentagon representatives. They presented evidence that shook him to his core. Satellite imagery showed objects appearing above Skinwalker Ranch on 17 separate occasions over 3 months, each time entering restricted military airspace without authorization. These weren't birds or weather balloons. The objects registered on multiple tracking systems simultaneously, performed controlled maneuvers, and exhibited flight characteristics that violated known physics. Military officials explained that some of these airspace incursions occurred during active Air Force training exercises involving F-35 fighter jets. Pilots had been forced to abort maneuvers due to unidentified objects appearing in their flight paths. This created genuine safety hazards and operational security concerns. The Pentagon's position was clear. Whatever was happening at Skinwalker Ranch was interfering with critical military operations and national defense readiness. The briefing included technical analysis that terrified Brandon. Objects above the ranch emitted electromagnetic signatures matching experimental propulsion systems being developed under black budget programs. Either someone at Skinwalker Ranch possessed technology that should be impossible for private citizens to access, or something unknown was mimicking classified defense capabilities. Both scenarios represented unacceptable national security risks from the government's perspective. Brandon tried explaining that his team wasn't creating these phenomena. They were documenting naturally occurring or unexplained events. The military officials weren't interested in paranormal explanations. Their concern was simple. Restricted airspace was being violated, military operations were being compromised, and it was happening above property Brandon owned and controlled. That made him legally responsible regardless of whether he was causing the activity or simply observing it. The FAA presented violation notices that could result in millions of dollars in fines and potential criminal charges. Brandon learned that as the property owner, he could be held liable for anything originating from his land that violated federal aviation regulations, even if he had no control over the phenomena. The legal framework existed to prosecute him simply because the unexplained activity was happening above his property. By July, Brandon Fugal faced a legal nightmare with no good options. Federal prosecutors presented him with what amounted to an ultimatum during a private meeting in Salt Lake City. They had compiled evidence of ongoing airspace violations, electromagnetic interference with military systems, and possession of sensor data related to classified defense programs. The case they'd built could result in criminal prosecution under national security statutes, with potential penalties including massive fines and even imprisonment. Brandon's legal team reviewed the government's position and delivered devastating news. The feds had legitimate legal grounds to proceed aggressively. Property owners can be held liable for activities originating from their land that violate federal regulations, even without intent or direct causation. The phenomena at Skinwalker Ranch, regardless of their unexplained nature, were creating documentable violations that Brandon couldn't dispute. The government's offer was presented as mercy rather than punishment. Sell Skinwalker Ranch to approved buyers, specifically a consortium of defense contractors with existing government clearances and security protocols, and avoid prosecution entirely. The buyers would implement proper containment measures, coordinate with military authorities, and ensure future phenomena didn't compromise national security. Brandon would receive fair market value, potentially retain consulting rights, and walk away without criminal charges. Refusing meant facing federal prosecution with uncertain outcomes. Even if Brandon eventually won in court, the legal battle would cost millions and take years. Meanwhile, the government could seize the property under eminent domain laws, citing national security emergencies. They'd already consulted with Justice Department attorneys who confirmed this authority existed and could be exercised if Brandon remained uncooperative. Brandon spent sleepless weeks consulting lawyers, talking with the team, and agonizing over a decision that felt like betrayal of everything Skinwalker Ranch represented. He'd purchased the property to conduct transparent research and share findings with the world. Now he was being forced to hand it over to shadowy defense contractors who would classify everything and end public investigation forever. What really triggered the government's aggressive intervention was Dr. Travis Taylor's discovery in late April, a finding so significant that it justified every extreme measure the Pentagon subsequently took. Using advanced ground-penetrating radar and gravimetric analysis, Travis detected massive underground anomalies beneath the mesa that defied natural geological explanation. The data suggested artificial structures or technology buried at depths exceeding 200 feet, with metallic composition and geometric precision impossible for natural formation. Travis's analysis indicated these structures predated any known human construction in North America by potentially thousands of years. But the truly alarming discovery was the energy signature emanating from below. The underground anomaly was actively generating electromagnetic fields that pulsed in regular intervals, suggesting operational technology rather than inert artifacts. When Travis cross-referenced the frequency patterns with classified databases he had security clearance to access from his previous defense work, he found exact matches to experimental propulsion research conducted during Cold War black budget programs. Either someone had buried advanced technology beneath Skinwalker Ranch decades ago, or something unknown was producing emissions identical to humanity's most classified defense research. Travis submitted his findings to Brandon in a confidential report, recommending immediate consultation with federal authorities due to the national security implications. Brandon initially hesitated, knowing government involvement would complicate everything. But when the electromagnetic pulses from the underground source began interfering with Hill Air Force Base communications, the decision was taken out of his hands. The Pentagon learned about Travis's discovery through their own monitoring of the ranch and immediately classified the entire matter. This explained why the government moved so aggressively. They weren't just concerned about airspace violations. They believed Skinwalker Ranch sat above technology that could revolutionize aerospace capabilities or represented evidence of non-human intelligence operating on American soil. Either scenario demanded absolute government control and complete information suppression to prevent foreign adversaries from learning what existed beneath Utah's most mysterious property. The sale of Skinwalker Ranch was finalized in September for $214 million, far above the property's assessed value, but below what Brandon believed it was truly worth given the discoveries made there. The buyers formed a consortium called Advanced Aerospace Research Enterprises, comprised of defense contractors including subsidiaries of Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and several classified entities that operate under non-disclosure agreements with the Pentagon. The sale agreement contained provisions that Brandon's lawyers called unprecedented and draconian. Brandon would retain a consulting role with annual compensation of $500,000, but he'd have zero decision-making authority over research direction, data collection, or information disclosure. All findings would be automatically classified under Department of Defense protocols. The History Channel's filming access would be terminated immediately, ending The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch television series after the current season. Brandon fought every term, but had virtually no negotiating leverage. His attorneys warned that refusing the deal meant certain federal prosecution and likely property seizure under national security emergency powers. The government had already drafted eminent domain paperwork ready for immediate filing if Brandon declined the negotiated sale. At least this way he'd receive compensation and maintain nominal involvement rather than losing everything through forced confiscation. The most painful aspect was the non-disclosure agreement Brandon was required to sign. He cannot publicly discuss specific details about what Travis discovered underground, cannot reveal the full extent of government pressure that led to the sale, and cannot disclose information about the new owner's research plan. Violating these terms could result in prosecution under espionage statutes carrying decades in federal prison. Brandon Fugal, who purchased Skinwalker Ranch specifically to conduct transparent public investigation, now finds himself legally prohibited from sharing the most significant discoveries ever made there. The irony is crushing, but the alternative was complete destruction of everything he'd built over years of dedicated research. The Skinwalker Ranch team fractured immediately when Brandon revealed the forced sale and government takeover. Dr. Travis Taylor, despite his military background and existing security clearances, expressed profound frustration during an emergency team meeting that sources say became heated and emotional. Travis had dedicated years to rigorous scientific investigation at the ranch, collecting data he believed would advance human understanding of unexplained phenomena. Now that data would be classified, removed from public access, and potentially weaponized for defense applications, rather than shared with the scientific community. He understood national security concerns, but argued that transparency and peer review were essential to legitimate research. The government's approach represented everything he opposed as a scientist: suppression of knowledge for political and military purposes. Travis initially considered walking away entirely, but ultimately agreed to continue under the new ownership structure, believing he could do more good from inside than protesting from outside. His decision disappointed some team members who viewed it as capitulation to government overreach. Eric Bard's reaction was far more adversarial. As the principal investigator who designed many of the ranch's most sophisticated experiments, Eric viewed the government intervention as theft of intellectual property and suppression of groundbreaking research. He refused to sign non-disclosure agreements or accept employment under the new ownership consortium. Eric publicly criticized Brandon's decision to sell, arguing he should have fought the government in court regardless of the personal cost. Their professional relationship, built over years of collaborative investigation, ended in bitter arguments about principles versus pragmatism. Eric left the ranch in August and has since been vocal on social media about government suppression of UAP research, though careful to avoid specifics that might violate existing confidentiality agreements. Bryant Arnold found himself caught between loyalty to Brandon and concern about the investigation's future. As the ranch superintendent who managed daily operations and knew every inch of the property, Bryant understood the phenomena better than most. He'd witnessed things that defied explanation and believed the public deserved to know what was happening. But he also recognized Brandon's impossible position and the genuine legal threats he faced. Bryant chose to stay on under new ownership, primarily to protect the property and ensure whoever controlled it would treat the land with appropriate respect. His decision was pragmatic rather than enthusiastic. He needed the employment and hoped to maintain some continuity during the transition. Thomas Winterton's reaction reflected his long history with the ranch predating Brandon's ownership. As someone who'd experienced the phenomena for decades, Thomas had seen researchers come and go, each promising answers that never fully materialized. The government takeover was just another chapter in Skinwalker Ranch's long story of secrecy and suppression. The new ownership consortium's true agenda extends far beyond simple monitoring or passive observation of Skinwalker Ranch phenomena. Leaked documents and insider testimony reveal plans to actively weaponize the location and reverse engineer whatever technology exists beneath the mesa. Advanced Aerospace Research Enterprises has allocated over $400 million for expanded operations, including construction of underground research facilities, installation of military-grade sensor arrays, and recruitment of scientists with top-secret clearances to staff what amounts to a classified government laboratory disguised as private research. The primary objective is studying the underground anomaly Dr. Travis Taylor discovered for potential defense applications. If the technology generating those electromagnetic signatures can be understood and replicated, it would represent a revolutionary advancement in propulsion systems, energy generation, and possibly weapons development. Documents reference strategic aerospace capabilities that would provide decisive military advantage, language that suggests they're not just studying phenomena, but actively working to exploit it for national defense purposes. The government's secondary concern involves the airspace violations and unexplained craft appearing above the ranch. Rather than simply monitoring these incidents, the new research agenda includes attempts to communicate with or capture whatever is creating the phenomena. Proposals include deploying experimental technology designed to interact with UAPs, establishing protocols for controlled contact scenarios, and developing countermeasures against the electromagnetic interference that's been affecting military operations. This represents a dramatic escalation from Brandon's transparent scientific investigation to aggressive military intelligence gathering. Most disturbing are the contingency plans for what they're calling containment protocols. If the phenomena at Skinwalker Ranch pose genuine threats to national security or public safety, the government has authorized extreme measures including complete evacuation of surrounding areas, establishment of restricted military zones, and potential use of force against unidentified objects entering the airspace. The ranch is being militarized with permanent security forces, weapons systems, and emergency response capabilities that suggest they're preparing for scenarios far beyond peaceful research. The government clearly knows more than they've publicly acknowledged about what exists at Skinwalker Ranch, and why it matters. The aggressive takeover, massive financial investment, and classified research agenda indicate they view this location as strategically critical to national defense. Whether that's because they believe foreign adversaries are operating technology there, non-human intelligence is present, or ancient buried technology offers military advantages, the result is the same: complete government control and total information suppression. Brandon's public investigation threatened to expose something the defense and intelligence communities have worked decades to keep hidden, and they moved decisively to shut it down before revelations could spread beyond containment. The information suppression began immediately. History Channel footage was subpoenaed and classified. Episodes were edited to remove sensitive content. Social media posts about the ranch were systematically deleted. Witnesses received federal visits discouraging public discussion. Brandon Fugal, once championing transparency, now deflects questions citing confidentiality agreements. Within months, public interest declined as new information stopped flowing. The government achieved their goal: complete control over Skinwalker Ranch while erasing it from public consciousness.